Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Going south, going south. Going south, going south.
And the dogs are quiet. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, welcome universe to Talking South. This is episode 11, which is the longest Talking South has ever gone for a season. We only got to number 10 last year. And with me we have Jennifer Hynes from Boulder, Colorado. And also Robin Westenra from, I think, New Zealand. Is that okay? Is that right?
Yes, New Zealand, yes.
Okay. So, just to get us started here, I have a sweet little story about a bear from the Pentagon report, which is predicting near-term collapse of the deep state of the US military. So, in the conclusion, you know, this fantastic story. In Frank Tashlin's classic children's book, The Bear That Wasn't, a bear awakes from hibernation and, exiting his cave, finds himself in a huge factory that has been built over his forest home. Encountering a foreman, the bear is told to get back to work, to which the bear replies, "I don't work here, I'm a bear." Incredulous, the foreman says, "You're not a bear, you're just a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat." So this is Pentagon and the military report trying to tell certain people, certain groups of people that, oh, maybe we shouldn't be so settled in our preconditioned views of what is happening in the world. And I feel that they are kind of, in our context anyway, they are kind of addressing this to the USGS, you know, to the United States Geological Survey, because as you and I know, the USGS sent an expedition to Siberia, to Bennett Island in 1992, following a lot of scientific press speculations that what they were seeing on satellite images from Bennett Island, Siberia, was actually methane plumes. And so they sent a plane up there to measure, because the USGS, they measure everything. Whenever America goes to another country or whatever, they start exploring and measuring for minerals and, you know, air quality and everything. That's what the USGS does. So the first thing they do in the former Soviet Union after the Soviet Union collapses is to send an expedition called the Bennett Island project to measure the methane content of the air around this Arctic island. And in their video presentation from this project, they famously now say that our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever. And, you know, to me that sounds a bit like, you're not a bear, you're just a silly man who needs a shave, you know? Present company excluded. So yeah, maybe some kind of critique of the way that parts of the American society and government has been treating climate change. It's like we don't want to see these facts. We don't want to treat them as real facts.
That's true. We are in a time of alternative facts, and never more than right here and now. You know, we're in the time of boiling Arctic seas full of methane, not boiling because they're hot, but boiling because the methane is coming out and causing like all these huge methane fountains. And yet we've seen in your permafrost wars, I believe it was around January or so, the absolute denial on the part of the USGS of the methane crisis. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, and because Robin here, he pointed me in the direction to find this old 1992 documentary from the USGS and other partners, and that kind of, you know, in my eyes, that documentary gives us more context to the story, that over a very long time, many decades, they have been doing this. They have been denying what is right in front of them. So it's like, first they say in 92 that there's no methane whatsoever. And then you have last winter, Carolyn Rupert from USGS saying, she's actually the head of the methane hydrate division in USGS. So she's, you know, completely in the right place to talk about this. And she says that, no, methane can't melt because you would have to add heat. And the you know, on the video that Robin posted, we saw that it was you know, boiling there. The ocean is boiling there, and that's because it's the water that is hot enough to trigger the melting of the methane. And the water is, you know, if you go into a bathtub, the water is everywhere all the time. It's, you know, it's just all over, and it doesn't stop heating your body just because you feel warm in a second. It keeps being warm, right? So it's like,
yeah,
it doesn't cool down.
Yeah. I found her explanation very curious, and I thought it was kind of a strange thing how she kind of laughingly put down the premise that there was a huge methane problem, what we call the methane time bomb, you know, the methane bomb. Maybe bomb is possibly the wrong word. Maybe we should say a million fountains all spurting at once. Maybe that's less like a bomb. But she basically said, as you've mentioned, that it can't possibly happen because the methane cycle, melting cycle or whatever, would completely shut down. And then she threw in some kind of fancy technical terms, something about, you know, because it was eating all the heat. Well, yeah, that's because we are adding more than, like, with our carbon emissions to the atmosphere itself, something like 4 nuclear bombs per second or something absolutely atrocious. So there's a huge amount of heat being added to the atmosphere. I think she was using the word endothermic, if I
Yeah.
recall. But in any case, her explanation was curious, at best.
And the other extraordinary thing that she did was, I think it was her, they were saying, well, we measured this in Alaska and we didn't find anything, so it couldn't possibly be happening in East Siberia.
Yeah.
Because we already measured in Alaska and it wasn't happening there.
It's a bit like saying that. Oh look, there's a bear in the front yard, and then somebody goes to look in the backyard and says, "No, it can't be possible because there's no bear in the backyard." You know. Okay.
Yeah, very curious.
Mm. So, Robin, what have you found any more about this? Because you're reading these Russian English language papers.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything new. I mean, I think that item from the Siberian Times was absolutely amazing, and with the video footage, I mean, you can actually see it for the first time and so clearly. So all I did is I've just sort of done what I normally do and just collect all the data. I don't do it on nearly so much of a regular basis anymore. And then I had a look at the report from Tomsk Polytechnic University in Russian, and I've got a very basic translation in Russian English. I can read. I guess reading it in Russian won't really help.
So, can you and Jennifer give some kind of estimate for how widespread this is? Because I got a question here that I recorded from from the Reddit collapse thread. They say, "Do you have any info regarding how widespread this kind of thing is? Are we talking about an isolated case, or is there hundreds of these things forming?"
Well, I do know that Igor Samoletov and a crew of 45 people, I believe, on some Russian vessel has recently returned. They had a cruise in October, and they were going up all through the Laptev Sea, the East Siberian Arctic Shelf area, all of those areas up there, Kara Sea area. And they came across methane plumes all over the place. Basically, it's very scary. Of course, it's unprecedented because everything these days seems to be unprecedented. And they ranged in size, these fountains of methane. If you can picture it, the sea is about average of 60 meters or so deep. It's an extremely shallow sea, which is quite important to note for a couple of different reasons. Number one, there's less pressure, and so it's more prone, if there's a methane deposit that is starting to thaw, it's more prone to come out because it's not being held down as tight with so much pressure. That's number one. Number two, that sea's very shallow and it is a bit warmer. And number three, when it does come out, none of the methane is really absorbed in the water column. It pretty much disgorges itself out to the atmosphere. And they were seeing loads of these plumes all through that area up by, just off the coast of Russia, Siberia. They would range in size between like 100 meters and a kilometer. I bet there are ones that are larger than a kilometer. And they are dense. This is not just like little tiny bubbles coming up every so often that you might be able to detect. No, these things are just going so fast. The methane is coming out so fast that they were actually able to detect the air measurement of methane right above those fountain areas of 14 parts per million.
Oh.
Now that may not sound like a lot, but it's out of the parts per billion. We're about 1900 globally average, I believe, about 1900 parts per billion, varying on 2000 parts per billion. But up in this area where the methane is disgorging out into the atmosphere, it's 14 parts per million. And that is a huge amount more than the global average. And it's just...
They said yes. 7 to 9 times, didn't they, Jennifer?
Yeah, that's right. 7 to 9 times more than the global average. Thank you for finding that. So that's an absolutely huge measurement. And we're seeing it now on top of the Arctic sea ice extent record low for today. You know, I think October 30th, or what was that article you just sent our way, Torsten, that this is a record Arctic sea ice low for this moment ever since we've started taking measurements for this date. And I'd be interested to see what the sea ice extent is on top of it. You know, it's just very, very interesting. And in a creepy way, it's very engrossing, because you really can't just take your eyes off of it. If you know it's happening, you just watch this thing like a movie. Like, how can this be happening? It's happening so quickly. It's getting very hot up there.
And we should tell the audience that this is this methane coming up more and more. It's not just like an average phenomenon only interesting for scientists. It is actually, it has the potential, and I would say that it will somewhere down the line indirectly kill more people than the plague, than the Black Death. It's that kind of catastrophe. It's not something for scientists in white coats that are nerdy interested in this methane thing. It's actually a global issue, and it will these methane molecules, they heat the atmosphere more than 200 times more than CO2 on a 10-year basis, and it's a runway. It's a fast track to totally losing control over the global warming situation. Today they are still talking about having another COP meeting, not in Chile but in Spain, and they're talking about the Paris goals from the Paris Agreement for climate mitigation. And this methane thing, I won't say when it blows, because it already is blowing, but when it sort of ramps up, when it comes out in like 10 or 100 times more than this, then it's game over for any sort of civilizational control of this situation. So you have to think about it as the Black Death or the plague. This is something that every newspaper and every TV station and radio station and website in the world should actually write about every week. You agree?
At North America at the moment, I mean, you can see the consequence that they can't get their crops in. It's too cold, it's too wet, it's too something or other.
Yeah.
Well, we had a little bit of an abrupt climate change event here this last week here. Oh yes, in Boulder, Colorado, just innocent little Boulder, Colorado. Because we're right next to the Rocky Mountains, and the Rocky Mountains run north-south, and they run all the way up, the Canadian range and so forth. It's a natural place when these cold events come down. And as I always say, if it's down here, it's not up there, because it's not that the Arctic is getting like so much colder all of a sudden and pushing all of its cold air down on our heads. No, it's that something is pushing into the Arctic, making the Arctic hot, making it boil with methane in an unprecedented fashion. And in the meantime, the Arctic itself is reacting and thrusting a long finger of cold along. And it's probably happening on the Siberian side too, because it generally happens on both continents. But in the US, it's pushing a big cold finger right down that range. And we went, and I'm going to quote in Fahrenheit, so guys who are watching in centigrade, my apologies, but we went from about 76, 77 Fahrenheit on Sunday, and I was out raking my leaves and I was hot. And in about 24 hours, it went down to, the first drop was the next morning, it was 26 degrees. And that's accompanied by a lot of wind. And then it got down to about 1 degree Fahrenheit, which is pretty darn cold. And today's the first day in 4 days that it's come up again. And everybody's like, wow. And this is a record event for Denver, even for Denver, because it dropped so suddenly and so atrociously, and it was accompanied by 2 snowstorms as well. Okay. So all of a sudden, we're mid-October and we're down at 1 degree Fahrenheit with, 8 to 10 inches of snow, and it's kind of like, this is wild. But you have to understand the big picture, and then you start to understand why this thing is happening the way it is, and that everything is connected, and it's only because the Arctic got a big push on it, and there's so much heat going on there, it's melting like an ice cream cone, and this is like one of the long fingers.
So you're getting snow before us in Greenland. I'm going surfing tomorrow on my paddleboard, so it's still free of snow up here. So
Are you serious? That's amazing.
And I just checked the temperatures last night in preparation for this from Earth Null School, and I don't know how much that can be trusted, but in the area of Bennett Island, temperatures are about -8 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
And considering that the water doesn't even start to freeze until it's below 0 degrees because of all the salt water. It's pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, up here on the beach up here, I've observed that you have to go down to -18, -22 in order for it to really start freezing on the sea surface, because it's salty and you have tidal water in and out, and so it's not like it's just the flash freezes the moment the air goes down to 0, because the air is one thing, but the ocean temperature is another. When you're quoting the -8 C, that's for the air above Bennett Island, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to know, but I think that is surface air.
Yeah. It takes a long time from the day or from the moment you get sub-zero Celsius air and until the ocean has been warming all summer, all spring and summer.
Yeah.
So that gets down to freezing. Yeah. So.
And if you look at Earth Null School, the situation is still exactly the same as it was before. You just don't see as much of that kind of red color on the thing, because things are starting to turn to a very sort of thin layer of ice, and it is thin, half a meter or something.
Yeah, it's pretty thin.
Torsten, how is the Arctic sea ice volume doing? Because I know we've just hit a record low for this time ever for the extent. Do you have any idea about the volume?
It's kind of the worst day of the month for getting that question, because as you know, the University of Washington in Seattle, they only publish their numbers for October in like the second week of November or something. So it's like, you can try, and I try to sort of estimate the volume from the other numbers that we get. But that's on the 31st of October, it's the most insecure estimates that you can actually get. But I have the volume at second lowest or third lowest for the date now. But that's
Okay.
You have to take that with a ton of salt, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, extent is so much easier to measure because it's visual and you can actually, get it with a satellite. Whereas volume, you have to take a lot of, and the ice varies all over the place wildly, and calculate all that volume together, with the different thicknesses and so forth. I guess that takes a little bit more time. Is that right?
Yeah, and you also have, you have these calvings from the glaciers that are bigger than Manhattan and bigger than some cities. And they are also counted as sea ice. And the moment they leave the glacier and are thrown into the sea, they are also counted as volume and thickness and stuff. So it gets kind of complicated, and I'm pretty sure that the numbers will look much smaller if we could distinguish the mountain ice from the sea ice when that mountain ice is dumped into the sea. Because as you know, if you see something on a picture from a fjord or from the sea that is like 10 meters high, you can be pretty darn sure that it's not a sea ice,
Exactly. And I would say a general rule of thumb should be, once the ice breaks away from the mothership, it's gone. It's not counted anymore. It's kind of like a card game. You put it off in the pile, because then once it breaks off, it's really just a matter of time before it just thaws entirely.
Yeah, I've got a question for you both, because it relates to sea ice volume or more specifically thickness, because the data that I use comes from the US Navy site, right? And that shows kind of very, very thin ice, half a meter and so forth. But there's other data around, I think, and that shows quite different sort of figures for the temperature. And I'm just wondering kind of what your opinion on kind of the accuracy, and even the accuracy of measuring sea ice thickness by satellite. I mean, we tend to be a bit of a Luddite and think that the old method of doing it with a sonar and a submarine is going to be the most reliable.
Zoom just told me that they've removed the 40-minute limit, so we can go on for as long as we want.
Yeah, I just saw that. Yeah.
Okay. You were saying, it's a good question. Do you have more? It's a very hard question to answer, really, because you have the.
Actually, why I posed it, because I can't answer it myself.
Yeah, no, you have the U.S. Army. They're doing their measurements, and they, everyone who measures has, different customers, and the U.S. Army, they are thinking about how navigable the sea is. So they're sort of thinking about submarines and warships and stuff, how hard it would be for them to cross the polar ocean or something. So they may be less accurate for that reason. I don't know. And then you have the satellite, like the Japanese, or what's that called? Anyway, the satellites that JAXA uses, the Japanese Space Agency, they have their problems because they measure from space, and then you have different types of ice that are have different what's that called? Different density, so they may lie high in the water or low in the water, and it's kind of hard to say what is snow and what is ice and all that kind of thing. So it's but the only time I think that you will be absolutely sure how much volume and thickness we have is like when we hit zero in a couple of years, because then everybody will agree.
There's not going to be any argument. We won't waste our time, saying, how far have we gone since the, advent of the Industrial Revolution, and arguing about, is it 1 degree, is it 3 degrees, if you add it all up. No, it'll be perfectly clear. We won't have any ice, and that'll be it.
Yeah, and even Europeans and Americans can agree that it's 0 square miles and 0 square kilometers and all of that song and dance. So okay. So Robin, you have you've been pretty active the past days and weeks, haven't you? With all kinds of videos. What have you've posted some video about China as well? Is that related to this or?
I just kind of post on whatever I think is important at the time, and I don't want to pretend there's only one show in town.
No.
I mean, there's a theoretical option that we could nuke ourselves before we starved to death. So I sort of pay attention to these other things as well.
Yeah, because I think the first summer I lived here in Greenland, there was a Chinese research vessel that came down here to nuke on the west coast of Greenland,
you're talking about that, yes.
And they had sailed directly over the North Pole with no problem, and then down to nuke.
Oh, had they? They went through that passage.
And they did that in order to establish the possibility of doing that in like 5 years or when it melts more.
In what month? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, that's all right.
In what month did they go over that passage, Torsten? Because it matters,
Yeah, I think they came here in September or something. They came to.
Okay, so pretty much the low sea ice extent.
Yeah, but this was 2018, if I remember correctly. It may have been 2017 because I can't really remember. But it was at least not this year. It was 1 or 2 years ago. Yeah.
But have you heard about? I mean, there seem to be all sorts of expeditions and vessels. Have either of you heard of this expedition? It's just the two of them. I think one of them's a Norwegian.
Yeah,
Swede. I'm not sure.
Berge Ausland from Norway. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the South African guy from Switzerland, and they claim to be at the North Pole. And they've described some pretty horrific sort of conditions, and their yacht, it wasn't even a proper vessel, took them allegedly to 84 degrees north at the end of September. So that would have to be saying something.
What did they describe about the North Pole? Like, how did they say it looked? Did it have? Because it's been raining up there, in all sorts of conditions.
That's the whole thing. It's a sort of private expedition, and they're not actually saying very much that seems to be of any scientific use. It's all sort of tinged with kind of very subjective feelings. But they do sort of say that they've seen a lot of very bad quality ice, and if anyone was to fall in, they'd never get out again. And just the odd little comment sort of in between saying, "Oh, this is the greatest adventure of his life," and stuff like that.
I can relate to that because when I was at the University of Oslo, there was an event, with showing slides and stuff down in the downtown part of university with Berge Ausland, the same guy, and this is like in the 90s. So it's like when he showed, because he was skiing alone with a sled. He was carrying a sled behind him. So he was skiing alone to the North Pole from Greenland, I think, and you could just see, because the sea ice back then, you had to climb it. It was like 3-4 meters with sort of stacked up ice because of the movement. They sort of build these small mountains, and it's like, and you could see it was a very exhausting trip, because the last 2 or 3 days he lost like 15 kilos or 20 kilos or something. You could actually see him getting skinnier. on those
Yeah.
last slides. This is the same guy who is going up there now. So when we finally get the pictures from this expedition, we can actually compare sort of image for image how much thinner the ice has become.
Well, there's enough coming out. I mean, you just need to kind of look beyond them and look at the ice, in the background, and I mean that shows a lot in itself, because we don't often see these images.
Yeah. Then you have another expedition, which is a 1-year expedition. With a Polar Stern ship, and it's like I think the crew is like 50 or 100 people or something, and their goal is to freeze, to freeze stuck in the ice. So to all the deniers out there, this was by design. They wanted to freeze stuck in the ice, and the whole point of this is to freeze stuck in the ice, like Fridtjof Nansen, the explorer from Norway, did with his Fram ship. The Fram Strait is named after this expedition with the ship Fram. So they are doing all kinds of measurements of sea, air, and animal life and plant life and everything. And they actually have a site there where they publish a lot of these things as they go, I think. And also pictures of polar bears and stuff. But it's like dark up there now, I think.
Yeah. But it's amazing that they are doing these expeditions. I mean, especially I'm amazed by the other couple, being up at 90 degrees north in the beginning of winter when it's dark. I mean, it must be horrific conditions that I could only compare perhaps with Captain Scott or something.
Yeah.
Torsten, do you ever go out in a boat and investigate things?
In a boat?
Yeah.
No, only on my surfboard actually. So, but we have got a tremendous stream of icebergs coming out the fjord now. It's the peak iceberg season, October, November. So I'm, one of my sort of boyish dreams is to paddle up to one of the icebergs and then jump over to the iceberg with my camera on my forehead.
Maybe you could get some hooks and be like one of those superheroes and throw the hooks out and haul yourself up there and then do something. But
I kind of imagine it's pretty dangerous because let's say I jump onto an iceberg and it breaks in two and it smashes into my head and I get knocked out. It's like
I don't think so.
I will be whale food within short, I think. No, but it's like with everything. If you're going out in the mountains or at sea or whatever, you have to use some common sense, and not be too careful, but not be too daring either. At least if you're not in a team and you're not wearing a helmet and stuff, you just have to be a little bit more careful. But it's plenty fun, because in January I went down to visit my translator who translated my novel down in the Canary Islands, and we were walking along the beaches and sitting on restaurants and looking at the sea and stuff, and I just found that whenever there came some kind of transport ship or whatever that you could see in the horizon, I was like, oh, is that an iceberg? Is that an iceberg? Because it's like my brain has been reprogrammed to always be on the lookout for icebergs, because that's what
Absolutely.
I do every day up here. Yeah.
You do have to know what you're looking at, and I hope I have enough time to tell this, but when I flew over Greenland in September of 2012, that kind of epic journey that sort of shook me to my core, I was looking down before I got to Greenland, and it was, September, beginning of September, and I was like, God, it's so rough. I don't even... Why am I seeing all those white caps? And I'm thinking from 36,000 feet that I'm going to see some white caps, because I couldn't compute what I was looking at. But I was looking at so many icebergs that filled the entire sea. And you really have to train yourself to look at it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you're like, oh my God, this is the result of global warming and all the huge ice that's melting in Greenland. It's all just breaking off and crumbling into the ocean, filling it.
I actually do think that I have footage of that same thing you're talking about. When I flew to Iceland 2 years ago, I also thought it was white caps, waves that are breaking. But it's like, I'm like 10,000 meters up. So I took some still images from the window and some video. So we could maybe, play them sometime and talk on top of it. We've been talking about using some other air footage from Greenland, you and I, Jen. So maybe that's our next episode, to have some aerial photos and videos from.
That would be great.
Greenland. Yeah. So Robin, you were saying?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I just did a sort of a bit of a mental preparation, but I haven't been doing so much on this recently, and I just went back and how I throw out these sort of videos about what the ice thickness is and the temperatures, and I did that, and then I checked also on what Margot is doing, and she's doing something quite interesting. She has been measuring every day the data from NOAA and takes the mean level.
Yeah.
She's been doing it, I think, about 6 months now, and you can definitely see an increase over that period of the amount of methane coming out. And it's not an exception; it's a trend, because you can see it posted every day for over 6 months.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it's down, but the general tendency was up. And then the other thing was just the shock of seeing the pictures on cams at total column, and just how those levels have gone up. And I was used to sort of seeing average levels of 1,800 parts per billion of methane, and then 1,800 parts per billion is the low level. That's the level that you get in the South Seas of the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a total column of 1,900, 2,000, even 2,100.
Do you think you can explain to the audience what a total column means compared to the other measurements?
I'm not a technical thing, but they measure the methane at surface, and they measure it at various levels.
Yeah.
In the atmosphere. So total column, I think, is the totality of all those readings. I'm just guessing. I don't know the technical.
It's some kind of average for every height above the sea level or something?
Well, I don't know whether that's the way that they measure it, or whether they just average it out. Someone else. I don't know. Jennifer, do you know?
Well, my understanding was for those extreme measurements, it was rather localized. So those would be air measurements, and I'm not sure at what altitude, but probably at maybe ship level altitude or something. That's the feeling I got. And those were the measurements that were coming in like 14 parts per million, which is absolutely astronomical for methane. As you said, 7 or 8 times normal.
Mm-hmm.
But
so we haven't seen any reflection of this in what they found in Bennett Island, in the data, cams and everything.
Okay.
We've been looking and thinking, well, huge amounts of methane coming out everywhere, including out of sort of Sweden and Norway and Finland, but there's no methane seemingly coming out of the eastern Siberian sea, and that's really extraordinary. And it
So
even
do you
meted
think
out
they are
well.
covering that up?
Perhaps it's not really going on at all until of course I read the Russians account.
Yeah.
You know, that,
So you think they're covering it up? It would make sense because they have been, as I said in the start of this show, they have been flat out denying it, saying there was absolutely no methane whatsoever. The reason I used that example with no methane whatsoever is that if it's one thing we know, it is that's the way nature and the air and the atmosphere works. It wants to mix things around. So if it's one thing we know absolutely, it's that you can't have zero methane anywhere on this planet because it mixes and they could have said like it was the level was 666 and we could have believed it, but when they say zero, no methane whatsoever, then we know absolutely that they are lying.
But
they're just outright lying, absolutely.
But they can. I mean, down here in New Zealand, you probably realise that we've got a bit of a thing with dairy cattle, and huge amounts of methane coming from there. And of course, you've got people here saying, "Oh, methane's not a problem because it doesn't stay very long in the atmosphere like carbon dioxide, and it turns into water vapor, so it's not a problem." So it turns into CO2, and it turns out the rest into water vapor. So no problem there, eh?
No.
Not to mention that as it turns into CO2, if it happens to be in the water, the part that's turned into CO2, to do that, it has to acidify the water column. So it adds to ocean acidity, it adds to the general CO2 level, and it adds to the methane level for whatever didn't break down. So, I mean, there's nothing good to be said about methane. I mean, the craziest thing that's ever been said here in the U.S., we had a campaign to use natural gas because that was a safer and cleaner alternative, which was all just hype, really.
That's the same thing as in Norway, because Norway is also an oil-producing country, and they say the same thing, that the natural gas is a transition fuel, as we are waiting to get really sustainable and green, we will just use all the gas we can pump. It's like they just want to make money. But they can't.
That's despicable. It's very sad. We're such a despicable species,
And I had to hear this from the British and from other nations in order to figure out that every nation's politicians say this to their population. They say every nation that pumps oil says that our oil industry is just so much cleaner than all the others. But every country says that.
Here in the U.S., we have clean coal. Think of that.
Fabulous.
I got a wonderful illustration of all this a couple of years back, because in Britain they were claiming that they had their first day of producing their energy needs without coal, and this was a great achievement. But then I think it was TV4, one of those channels, did the backstory, and what they're actually doing is that they're importing old growth forestry from Virginia, burning it to make into briquettes. They don't include the energy needed to turn it from one form into another, all the CO2. So that's irrelevant. And so they burn these briquettes and say, "Oh, look at this wonderful achievement. We're not burning coal." But someone had actually done the maths and worked out that they were using more carbon than if they just burnt coal in the first place.
Yeah, there's no free ride. That's for sure.
That's the same with Germany. It's like all the oil and energy used to fell the trees and chop them up and stuff, and then put them on a ship to Germany and wrap them in plastic and transport them on trailers and stuff. So the European Union countries, they're like, "Oh, we're super green. We get these briquettes from America, super green," until you do the real accounting for it. And in Norway, we are even more what's it called, hypocritical. because we are selling eco fuels at the at the petrol stations, and that eco fuel is consisting of palm oil that destroys all the rainforest in Asia, in Southeast Asia. Yeah. It's like you can't trust a single word. It's like the old joke. How can you tell if a politician is lying? Mouth is open. If the mouth is open, they're lying.
And we're so myopic when we look at things. We can't really calculate the total cost of civilization because we look at one little piece and say, "Oh, I'm green."
Yeah.
But then when you look at nothing is everything's interconnected, and you just put it all together and what it took from the very beginning to the very end to get this whole situation going, and the cost is astronomical, and the weight of civilization on our biosphere is also astronomical and growing.
And that was what I was going to say about the methane releases and CO2 releases and everything. That I just saw the stats on water vapor. Water vapor amounts to 50% of the global warming is from water vapor. Just air that vaporizes from the ocean. So you have to think about if we burn coal or burn eco palm oil or whatever in our cars, or if there is a methane release from the seabed, that goes into heating up this much, and then you have to add that that will increase the evaporation and create more water vapor, which heats it even more. So it's like it's pretty hard to do sort of the accounting for all of these things, because the one thing piggybacks on another, and the feedbacks also feed on each other. So if it's one thing that we can be absolutely certain about, it's that we have no carbon budget left. We have no carbon to spend, to stay within safe limits. We are way past any safe limit, and you can see that daily on the planet. With the wildfires in California and the floodings everywhere.
Oh, it's so scary. I mean, everything is happening so fast, and the fact that they're turning off, 1 million PG&E customers is kind of a what do you call it when the action is, before the fact, right? Preventative action. Yeah. And then the fires are raging nonetheless, and one of them was sparked from a very high voltage thing that actually hadn't gotten turned down. Everything else had. So, it's so tinder dry, and this is abrupt climate change. We're looking at abrupt climate change. It hits I'm next door to California by just 1,000 miles away, and here we've got record cold and record snowfall for October next door in California. They've got raging wildfires and very high winds and drought conditions and burning up. So, I mean, it's absolutely horrendous. And then, of course, next door to me in the U.S. is the Midwest, and there they've got all the floods and the crops that have been lost. All of these three bands right next to each other are all experiencing the first signs of abrupt climate change one by one, and it's very stunning. You have whiplash just looking at the weather news around here lately.
And then, of course, the media is the other thing that sort of bothers me. Because, I was just looking, I saw this thing from April saying, the drought in California is over. We've got all this water in the lakes, which was true, by the way. So problem over, and then the other day, something from CNN saying, unprecedented dry conditions, I mean, 6 months ago they were saying the drought is over, and then 6 months later they're not using the word drought, but they're admitting, of course, that it's tinted right without actually saying it. They never say it.
Yeah, No, we still have mosquitoes here. I was just trying to kill a mosquito, and Greenland had the record amount of wildfires this summer.
Yeah.
It wasn't really record warm, at least not in Nuuk, but we had like multiple fires going on at the same time, and this is. You have to think about Greenland. This is very, very far away from where people live. It's not like you have a fire department out in these fjords. It's like they have to sort of invent how to do this because it's like a almost a 2-day ride with a boat to get into these places. So, but the reason it burns is like the same as everywhere else. Is drier than it's been before. And up here you have, or at least north of here, you have 24-hour sunshine. So if you have like 2 or 3 weeks of good weather, it's like just drying out all the moss and all the tundra completely. And then it's like you don't have thunder and lightning every year, but it's like if somebody broke some glass that is lying on the ground or something, or I think some of the fires were from campfires, from hunters and fishers and stuff. But it's like people are not used to nature catching fire up here because it's usually so cold and wet, right? So.
Well, it was a bit like a couple of years ago when Olympia National Park caught fire. The rainforest catches fire. I mean,
yeah.
Come on, man.
Who would have thought?
It's an oxymoron. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like
how can it catch fire if it's rainforest?
It's like we've had in Norway. We've had what do you call it? Not a swamp, but bog. Yeah, bog fires, and in the western part of Norway. In the western part is the rainiest part. So when you have a bog fire, that's almost unbelievable, at least to the old people. It's like, how on earth can you get a soggy, wet bog to start burning?
Yeah.
But when it actually does start burning, it's like a very concentrated storage of carbon. It's so much carbon in those bogs. And they also found, the scientists found that, I think in Central Africa, in like the Congo or something, you have these very, very thick bogs, very, very thick swamps, maybe hundreds of meters down into the ground, with also, amazing amounts of carbon that the scientists have detected and registered, and those are also a risk. If they start burning, it will be like, almost be like the East Siberian Arctic shelf.
So that leads me to a question which is related, and I wanted to ask is, why you think, at least according to Kant, because there's so much methane coming out at surface level in Scandinavia. More than anywhere apart from India and China, it looks.
Yeah, it's like I did study at college. I did study biology, and you have to remember that all kinds of natural processes, like fungus and the names of these things, rotting trees and fungus and.
The Acilia mushroom things. Right?
Yeah, mushrooms. Mushrooms also.
It's not exactly mushrooms, but the fungus that breaks down.
Yeah, but the mushrooms also. All of these things and plants and things, they also produce methane. So it's not. It doesn't have to be a cow or a factory or an oil installation or methane hydrates. It's like methane and CO2 are very, very basic molecules for all kinds of life on the planet. So it's a very, I can't really answer your question. It's like, I've seen your shows and your videos where all of sort of Finland, Sweden, Norway is sort of dark red with very high emissions. It must be something about, the leaves falling down and getting wet and rotting or something. It's like we used to, in spring in Norway, we used to get this very, very rotten, almost rotten egg-like smell in the spring when we were going down to the football field to play after a long winter. We were bored of snow and ice, and when the snow and ice has just gone away and it's starting to green a bit, it's like very, very sort of rotten smell to that lawn or to that grass field. So I imagine that they are then releasing lots of methane and sulfur or whatever. It's like natural things that have been stored under the ice for so long. So.
Yeah, they're interesting things with all these wildfires, the forest fires in Siberia. I mean, those are peat fires, aren't they?
Yeah.
So
Tundra
that
fires?
That they don't go out completely. They're ready for the next season.
Yeah, that interestingly, my grandfather used to talk about that all the time because it happened in the 1930s in Norway, on an island in the west. But you had a turf fire or something like that, and it burned like all summer and autumn, and then the snow came, and it was winter, and in the spring it started blowing again, and you got oxygen into the soil, and then it just started burning again. And Radøy, I think it's called, one of the islands in the west. And so it's like you had some very, very hot summers in the 1930s. All the climate deniers are talking about those 1930s summers. And so interestingly, in Norway, those things happened in the 1930s that are happening in Greenland these days, with the turf fires. And we also had a terrible tsunami in one of the fjords, with the permafrost melting up in the mountains. So you have a huge avalanche of rock slide into the fjord, and almost all the cattle and people in that fjord area were wiped out, they died. And amazingly, for my family history, it's like my grandfather on the mother's side was there on a bicycle holiday like a week or month before this rock slide and this catastrophe. And also my grandmother on the father's side, was there like, independent of each other in the weeks or months just before the tsunami there in Norway. And it's like, if any of those I would be wiped out as a consequence if one of those had been there during the rock slide and the tsunami. But my point was really that now, 2 years ago, we saw the tsunami here in Greenland because the permafrost in the slope, in the mountain slope, had melted, and then you get a huge tons and tons of rock going down into the fjord and traveling tens of miles in to the end of the fjord and wiping out villages by the fjord and killing Inuit villagers. So those things.
Sorry, guys. It's Halloween here, and I forgot to turn my lights off. I'll be right back. It's like I've been getting the doorbell ringing all the time, so I'm sorry. I'll be right back.
All right. So it's a Halloween show.
I saw a funny cartoon around Halloween. It was the mother comes out with the child, and then there are these three characters, and they said, "Oh, that's nice. We've got so and so. We've got a Trump supporter," because there was someone dressed in the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really catching on. These all of these American traditions are sort of just spreading around to every country.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back again.
I usually try and hide from the trick-or-treaters, but I forgot to turn my lights out, and they were all hammering on my doorbell.
Yeah, so you better not get your trees full of toilet paper or whatever they do in America.
No kidding.
Yeah. No, so my point was really that things that happened 90 years ago in Norway with permafrost and wildfires, they are now happening all the way up in the Arctic, in Greenland and Siberia. So that's very, very scary. Mm.
Incredibly so. And it's gonna. I think the place to watch the next few months is going to be Australia.
Okay.
Really,
Not so much,
very
but it's
with fires.
yeah. Well, yeah, just with fire and just with rapid warming, and then they've got this sudden stratospheric heating phenomenon that's given us a sort of a cooler spring here, but it's leading to unprecedented conditions in Australia.
Really? Well, I have been hearing more about that sudden stratospheric warming. That's like the latest buzzword for the past year or so. And I think that that's happening over Antarctica. If I recall, I read an article recently, I think last week or the week before, that there was sudden temperature warming over Antarctica. And do you know anything about that? And the Antarctic. I know you follow it quite a bit.
I don't know in detail, but yeah, I've gone into it a wee bit, and because I've had such sort of my attention has just been solely on the Arctic. I tend to kind of, things sort of register with me, but I can't go into the detail, and I feel very remiss because it's my part of the world, and I should really be reporting on what's happening in Antarctica.
Well, I think what's so interesting about Antarctica is, for so long people thought it was, the stable place. And of course, that's proven out to not be the case at all. And of course, West Antarctica was highly anticipated, it's breaking down, it's melting no matter what. And now East Antarctica too, with the Totten Glacier and all the water going in under there, and it's experiencing sudden stratospheric warming as well. So I think East Antarctica is on the move.
Yeah, yeah. And people on Facebook, I noticed, reposting this article that came, I think, from the Washington Post in 2017 about, record ice extent in Antarctica, and then they're posting this as if it's today's news.
Yeah, I saw that. They're trying.
I mean, the complete. The situation has completely changed since 2007.
They're trying to use the past decade data for as long as possible, and trying to fool more people still with the 2, 3, 4 years old data. So yeah, because it used to be the denial argument that. So the Arctic is losing sea ice, but look at Antarctica, and now they're still trying to say the same thing.
Well, then they would say, well, Antarctica is really gaining ice.
Say that by using out of date stuff.
Yeah.
So, as you said, Jennifer, about facts don't matter.
Facts don't matter.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like those facts. Bring us some other facts.
I'm trying to just kind of look at various things and just look at the facts and see where they fall and draw my own conclusions from that, rather than be guided by some sort of ideological principle, I suppose.
That's what you have to do, and that's what I'm hoping that the U.S. military and Pentagon is starting to do as well, because you can be as communistic or capitalistic as you want, but you have to have a true assessment of what is going on in the Arctic and the Antarctic. That's important for everybody who lives on the planet. So quit the ideology and start.
You kind of need to be able to grow food, don't you?
Yeah, it's like everybody needs to eat food and drink clean water. So quit the ideology and just assess the true situation. That would be my parting words. This is drawing to a close.
Yeah, don't be afraid to look at the truth, you know.
Yeah,
Don't be afraid to take a deep dive and put all of the data points together and not just cherry picking and selecting something that's convenient and getting very myopic and adhering to it like a religion. It makes no sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, otherwise you end up like, well, Michael Mann, for instance.
Yeah.
Wow.
It must be.
Point fingers, but I just did.
It must be kind of
it's
hard
hard
to be a
not
Michael
to.
Mann, because Michael Mann is getting attacked from the denier side and also from the doomer
We're going to feel a
community.
little bit sorry for him because he gets it from every direction.
It's
but,
like
you know,
He does, but you know, he does it to himself, and he's made a deal
Yeah.
with the devil, and now he's complicit, and he has to march with the complicit sort of marching orders, you know.
What do you say in America? He's between a rock and a hard place. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Not a very fun place to be, you know. I kind of have compassion for the guy for making a deal with the devil the way he has, but you know, done is done. I mean, he took even a pot shot at us, Torst and Robin, during the Permafrost War debacle, which I thought was most entertaining, you know, roused Michael Mann to get up and make a statement that methane is not a problem and there's no bomb. The problem is human imagination. The problem is when you say bomb, you think boom, but bomb is not bomb. Bomb is like a huge amount over a very short period of time. It doesn't have to explode in your face.
Did Mann actually say that methane was not a problem?
Our ability to respond, doesn't it? That's all. That's what's meant by a
Yeah,
bomb.
but there's also a difference between a time bomb and a bomb. You know, a time bomb is, you know, you can say about, you know, some crazy person in your town, like he's a ticking time bomb. It doesn't mean the guy is going to explode. You know, it means that he's going to do something crazy at some point, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So
that's right, and that's exactly what's happening, because as the permafrost and the subsea permafrost thaws so quickly, more and more and more, we're just, I mean, of course, it's chemistry. You're going to see the methane fountains, and they're going to increase, and they're even going to get bigger than a square kilometer, which is what they guesstimate, you know, a lot of them are, and these seeps are just going to come out all over the place. That's the bomb right there, you know.
Yeah, and the
bomb
time
is going off now. I mean, I don't like the idea of a time bomb, because that implies time, that something's there's going to be some singular event in the future that's going to happen that's not already happening. It's already happening, folks. You know, you know, I mean, we may not have seen what we can call a a blue sea event, but I mean, the Arctic ice is in terrible shape, and it's real, actual, and now. But I get a lot of people on sort of social media that are kind of looking towards some sort of singular event in the future.
It's
I'm
easier.
pulling away from that.
Yeah, it's easier for people who are just starting to look at it, just to sort of imagine that everything is going to happen on a Tuesday, some month, a couple of years from now, and then everybody on the planet will die on the same day, and people will try to post the very last Instagram picture on planet Earth or something. That's
or my last Big Mac or something.
It's a lack of imagination. It's not that simple, nor that quick. If it was that quick and it would all just end in a big flash of who knows what, that would be one thing. But what we're looking at is the beginning of untold misery for the human race until the end, until it all winds down. And this is called, the beginning of the fall of civilization, which is what we're starting to see. I mean, never in my memory and probably history. And I'm talking about California and the fires and PG&E, the electric company, cutting off 1 million subscribers. I mean, this is California. This is the year 2019, and they're shutting down 1 million people in California electricity as a preemptive measure. It's stunning.
I mean, you're finding, people in wheelchairs, not, on pensions and things, suddenly thrust into the dark. And it's amazing.
I think one of the sort of darkest parts of this long drawn out collapse is that everybody on the planet, to a varying degree, will know that we caused all this. Our mothers and fathers and our grandfathers and grandmothers caused this by being stupid fucking morons, not caring about what the scientists were saying. It's like 150 years ago that we discovered the greenhouse effect with CO2. Svante Arrhenius, the grandfather of Greta Thunberg, I think. So it's like it's not like, oh, we didn't know. It's like we knew for 150 years. And
we've known about it for over a century. I've known about the greenhouse effect since the age of 12.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a measure of our species and how mature we are if we're not able to react appropriately 150 years after knowing something. I mean, say the first 100 we didn't know enough to react, or who knows what, give them a slide on the first 100 years. But what about the last 50 years? That's my lifetime. What's happening? And you're seeing the entire thing rolling downhill, and it's just becoming more and more noticeable as it exponentiates more and more. And what we're talking about now here between the three of us is no longer the bleed. I mean, people are talking about these things now. It's being spoken about on TV quite a bit. Climate change is the new hot topic, but we've been seeing it all this time, and we haven't been able to galvanize ourselves into a concerted direction to try and address these things. We're just like, oh, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to keep it below 2 degrees, and this is how we're going to do it. But it doesn't seem to be happening.
I would say
the easiest thing to do is to say it actually doesn't exist and do a little bit of fancy, reverse logic.
I would say keep it below 8 degrees. That's much easier, It's like as long as the 2 degrees is just a number that some economist dreamed up. It's not a real number for when it stops being safe and starts being dangerous. Just let us say, as long as we keep the warming below 8 degrees, then we'll be fine, And it's much easier to adapt our economies to stay below 8 degrees. But the thing that they always leave out and always forget to tell you is that the whole point of talking about 1 degree or 2 degrees is that it's supposed to peak at 2 degrees, But now we sort of left that notion. No, it's like. I mean. No, it's just like 2 degrees.
I hate to laugh about it, but what about the lag time for CO2?
Yeah.
And my laugh is a doomer laugh. It's kind of like, oh my God, really? Because then what about the lag time for CO2 and all the CO2 that's been emitted by civilization itself in the last, say 10 to 15 years? That's not really even baked into. It's baked into the equation, but it hasn't yet manifested. You can't stop something from manifesting that's already there and is in the process of heating up.
That's right. And,
no, that's right.
But it's like you have
lag time.
You have in the Paris and IPCC thing is you have like. We are making the start of the Industrial Revolution a very fuzzy limit. It's now they're talking about 1950. They're using 1950 as the start of the Industrial Revolution in their very creative accounting, and also the year when it's supposed to be 2 degrees is like very, very fussy. Is that like the 2050? Is like 2100? Or is it just going to go up and up and up after it reaches 2 degrees, which is what it's actually going to do? It's just going to go right on up to 8 degrees anyway. So it's like they're not serious, you know. They're just, you know, throwing up some numbers and just hoping we'll swallow it.
Hey folks, I'm really enjoying our conversation. I really love to go on, but unfortunately I can't really. I'm going to have to leave now. I just thought I'd leave things on a slightly less serious note, because I have this sort of ex-Soviet era anecdote which I quote from time to time, which I think is quite useful in explaining where we are today. It's about a train that gets trapped in a snowdrift, and then Lenin comes along. He says, "Comrades, get out your shovels and let's dig ourselves out." And then Stalin comes. He says, "Shoot the driver." And then Khrushchev says, "Rehabilitate the driver." And then Brezhnev comes. He says, "Pull the blinds and let's pretend we're moving."
And that's exactly where we are right now. You know?
That's
Excellent.
exactly where we're at.
That's excellent.
We've pulled the blinds and we're creating our own reality with the force of our thought.
Yeah. That's
Super story. Okay, thank
The
you for.
secret doesn't have anything on us. We can create our own reality. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you for coming,
very much,
everybody.
Paul. And Jennifer, it's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah,
It's good. It's been good to talk to you too again, Robin. Good to see you.
same to you.
It
And
would be lovely if talking about things could solve them, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? We'd have it all wrapped up then.
And
Yeah,
enjoy the rest of Halloween and trick and treat candy and
There are
stuff.
little demons coming to my house, clawing, trying to get in.
You have to turn out the lights. Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Lovely to see you, Pam.
I love your video together. You have a very nice video the other day.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
See ya. Bye.
Okay. Well, I will.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Our data analysis showed no methane whatsoever.
This is a problem when we try to produce methane from hydrates. It keeps shutting itself down, right? So it's not a situation where we trigger breakdown and that breakdown is going to suddenly, like the whole deposit's going to release its methane all of a sudden. That is not a scientifically sound worry.
Going south, going south. Going south. Going south.